Awesome.
All right, so let's start with the first question, which is last year you shared some research showing what's holding enterprises back from building mobile applications. Can you tell me how this has changed?
I would say we've taken a modest step forward, and it is a step forward that we did in fact predict. So back in 2013, we asked our panel of large enterprises in the US and the UK how many apps they had mobilized. And on average, that number was shockingly low. It was 3.5 apps. So that's essentially back to the days of calendar, contacts, and email, really. So it's kind of like BlackBerry in 2006. The needle moved only slightly in 2014. So we went from 3.5 on average to 3.6 on average, so just a little tick upward. And when we ask why, right, we want to understand what is holding us back. The results were quite striking. So security is, of course, a multifaceted thing, and it's always the primary point of concern articulated by IT mobility stakeholders. But right behind that were issues linking to heterogeneous back-end data sources, the MBAS problem, if you like, or the back-end data source problem. And then right behind that, in third place, were issues related to developing applications for multiple heterogeneous client-side environments, right? So the cross-platform application design challenge. Now, we know that there are solutions to these problems, like Alpha Anywhere, that are hiding in plain sight. And so on that basis, we thought that between 2014 and 2015, we'd see greater adoption of these types of solutions, and we would see that average application number move up. We actually predicted a doubling, but between 2014 and 2015, we saw that number move from 3.6 on average to 5.8. So not quite the doubling that we had expected, and too early to call it a trend, but a discernible tick upward.
What else are you seeing in terms of workflows, apps, and business process organizations are prioritizing for mobilization, and why? So which applications are they going after first?
Well, the short answer is that every app, almost every workflow, almost every business process is at some level targeted for mobilization. So when we ask about what organizations intend to mobilize, the answer is the proverbial D, all of the above. Now, there are orders of prioritization, and that relates to the perceived benefits of mobilizing applications. So the rationale for mobilizing applications, kind of the trends there are interesting. So productivity comes first, and that has historically been the case, the rationale for mobilizing business processes. But what we've seen in the last year or two, particularly in the last year, is almost a closing of the gap. So productivity, yes, it's still first. It's the primary reason for mobilizing whatever the application is, particularly in the B2E and B2B environments. But we have seen increasing revenue and competitive advantage almost closing the gap with productivity as the primary reason for mobilizing a business process. So I think that's a very encouraging sign. It says that we're coming down the mobile maturity curve. And yes, we understand that this is about productivity enhancements, but we also understand that there are real net new revenue benefits associated with mobilizing business processes, and mobility is becoming a source of meaningful competitive advantage. If you're not doing it, then you stand to put your organization at risk for being at a competitive disadvantage. One of the areas that I know that Alpha Anywhere has been keen on highlighting, and one of the areas that we're seeing a focus on, is on these very basic processes. So forms, for example. I actually happen to have brought with me a number of forms that I've encountered in the last 2 or 3 weeks alone. Here is a bill from my mechanic. It's handwritten. It has a number of fields that could easily be addressed on a digital device, and I would imagine that Audi, the maker of my car, would be interested in capturing this type of information. So there's one. Here's a CORI form, a criminal background check from the state of Massachusetts, so I can coach my kids' soccer team. I passed, by the way, but here it is. It's a 2-page form that maybe the state would like to capture and associate with other databases, perhaps. Here's a travel request form from a client of mine, so another piece of paper that I had to fill out. I'm going on vacation in April, and we're renting a little boat. And it turns out you can have this pre-provisioned. I'm not going to do it, but if I wanted to, I could put this down on some paper and fax it. we're not immune here at IDC. Here's a new product request form that I would have to submit if I wanted to propose a new product at IDC. So forms are all around us, and they are, of course, analog in the extreme, if you like. And by digitizing these, we have the opportunity to absolutely revolutionize business processes and avail business processes to new forms of input. So think about what you might augment today's form with. So you have access, if you're doing this, say, on a tablet, for example, where there's great real estate to do these types of things. They're relatively easy to develop. They're relatively easy to adapt. I'd point you to Alpha's blog, where there's some great examples of this. You can associate this information with digital images, video, voice tags, geolocation, microlocation. You can even look at how long it takes, for example, a field tech to fill out a form on average, to do some triangulation and get some business intelligence around time on task. And so there are just the opportunities to increase productivity, but also increase competitive advantage, I think, are only limited by your imagination. If you think about how you can enrich these processes that today, and really for years and years and years, if not decades and decades, have just been analog and are still very much in place.
Excellent. Now, you had mentioned security, but are there other things that are sort of critical for these applications to come to life and be used within an organization? Are there any sorts of features or anything that an application would require besides security?
So beyond security, design, you really can't stress enough the sensitivity that needs to be given to how these forms are designed, right? So we've seen time and time again that is insufficient to kind of shoehorn a desktop app or even a form per se into a mobile device and expect good usage, good results, etc. So they really do have to be kind of optimized and designed for usage on a mobile device. It has to be kind of a thoughtful design, a thoughtful layout. But there's also the use case itself, right? So think about the difference between, me holding a clipboard and being able to put it down and use two hands and things like that. That is not going to happen on a smartphone or a tablet. So it has to be optimized for one hand, one touch usage. And if I'm at the bottom of an elevator shaft or if I'm in some remote location in the field, I'm going to be offline. And I may be offline for some very, very significant amount of time. So think, for example, of an energy worker out on an oil rig or something like this, where you might be offline for days. So can your application platform handle that type of scenario? These are all key considerations. The second biggest challenge behind security, articulated by IT decision makers that we survey as it relates to mobilizing business processes, is tying in to back-end systems. So the takeaway for our purposes in this piece is that this just has to be easy. It has to be accounted for. And so there are platforms out there like Alpha Anywhere that have been built from the ground up with easy access to back-end data systems in mind that abstract that complexity from the developer and really just address that problem right up front.
Have you seen any evidence that businesses are now preferring tablets over phones or bring your own device or things like that?
There is certainly evidence in the primary research that we do that suggests that in many ways tablets are at least as preferred a form factor as smartphones for addressing certain tasks and addressing certain workflows. So I'll give you some data. In our last major survey that we conducted in 2015, where we asked about this type of thing, 89%, no surprise, right? Almost 90% of organizations said, yes, we're mobilizing applications to smartphones. 71% said that we are actively targeting tablets, and another 17% said that we intend to target tablets for mobile applications within the next 12 months. So what you see there is tablets almost coming into parity in terms of their target, being a target for applications with smartphones. So, and it stands to reason, I think, right? If you think about the real estate that's available on tablets, the utility, the hardware becoming cheap and plentiful. It's worth noting, by the way, that these weren't all just iPads that were being targeted. There are Android devices in there. There are Microsoft Surface Pro type devices being targeted in there in about equal distribution as well. So I think that's worth noting that the tablet we expect to continue to be a mainstream device in enterprise mobility.
Excellent. So just two sort of quick final questions. The first one has to do with what types of software solutions, just in terms of market categories, are companies using to solve these sorts of problems, the problem of going mobile?
So we see a mix of solutions being adopted in the marketplace. And I would say that there is a clear preference when we ask the question toward solutions that address both the client side and that back-end data integration challenge, right? So there's a clear preference for a holistic end-to-end solution to address these challenges. In practice, what we see is a little bit different. I think the needle will move over time, but in practice, what we tend to see is a reflection of organizations that maybe went out and adopted point solutions, maybe adopted a client-side development solution, and then you came to a fairly hard realization that, oh my goodness, I haven't accounted for accessing my heterogeneous back-end data sources. How do I do that? And maybe that's another solution. Or maybe, as the data suggests in most cases, that's a DIY exercise. And that becomes really, really hard to maintain and really hard to scale over time. So we do think that over time, the preference and the market is going to adopt solutions that do offer this end-to-end capability.
Is there any sign that 2016 will be the year that enterprises are finally going to make significant investments and build their first 10 or 20 or 40 or 50 applications?
Well, I think the momentum that we have observed between 2014 and 2015, not quite a doubling, but a near doubling of the average number of applications mobilized by large enterprises, is a positive sign, and we fully expect that thread to continue, that trend to continue to grow in a geometric fashion. In fact, we're predicting that by 2018, the number of enterprise applications that have been developed will quadruple. And furthermore, what's even more interesting, we predict that 60% of those enterprise applications developed in 2018 are not going to have a PC antecedent. In other words, they will be net new. So we're seeing enterprises develop applications for the mobile conditions specifically, and we think that that trend will keep going. So the signs are certainly positive. We think that the ingredients as far as enablement are there, and we expect that trend to continue.
That's great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you.